credit rating agency Fitch is cutting its main rating on Hong Kong as months of anti-government protests weaken its economy. Fitch is the first credit rating agency to downgrade Hong Kong since this year's unrest. It's also the first Fitch downgrade for Hong Kong since '95, before its handover to China. Fitch says the recent political turmoil is testing Hong Kong's one country, two systems framework of governance. And many other problems. Let's talk this through. Joining us now, Bill Campbell, co-portfolio manager of DoubleLine Global Bond Strategy. Bill, fantastic to have you on the show. You've just written a great op-ed for CNN Business, talking about the fact that you see Hong Kong and the protests that we've seen there as an underappreciated risk here by investors, but also the impact it could have on the global economy. Does what we saw from Carrie Lam removing the extradition bill this week change anything in your mind, or are we still underappreciating the risks here?
Well, I don't think it mitigates the risk too dramatically, because if you look at the protesters' demands, removal of the extradition bill was only one of their demands. They do want to have more say in their elected leadership. They want to have amnesty for the protesters. So I don't think that the actions of Carrie Lam this week mitigate the protesters' initiative to continue this movement going forward. And as you highlighted, I think Fitch kind of corroborates what we've been seeing, that these protests are having a significant impact on the economy. And what we wanted to note in the article is that it's not just a domestic issue for Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a systemically important area for trade and finance. It's the 8th largest merchandise trade exporter across the globe, and it's one of the most important Asian financial centers.
You make such a great point, and actually in your article you quantify this, actually, I think, better than I've seen anybody do. You make the point that as a result of the 1992 Hong Kong Policy Act, any tariffs that we see applied between the United States and China are exempt as far as trade that flows through Hong Kong. And we're talking, what, 40% of China's foreign trade. This is so important when we're talking about the connection between the Hong Kong protests, Hong Kong itself, and the broader trade battle. Just talk me through this.
Well, so I think it's important to note that ever since the handoff of Hong Kong from the United Kingdom to China, the United States has afforded Hong Kong special rights, and those were afforded in the 1992 Hong Kong Policy Act, like you refer to. Now, trade originating out of Hong Kong is exempt, but there are exemptions for trade that comes out of China into Hong Kong and then on to another country. You can you can get a little bit of reduction on the tariffs that are currently in place via those, those type of transactions and maneuvers as well. The important thing to note is that in the past several months, we've seen an unprecedented bipartisan movement in the United States to stand on the side of the Hong Kong protesters and stand on the side of Hong Kong democracy. Both Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi both said that they stand by the Hong Kong protesters, and that if the Chinese take a more active role in Hong Kong, that this 1992 Policy Act needs to be revisited. And more importantly, if this act is revisited, there's a lot of foreign investment that comes that funnels into China through Hong Kong through the Shanghai Stock Connect and Bond Connect programs. And a lot of these special financial arrangements have been set up with the foundation being around the Policy Act that the United States has with Hong Kong. So the more that this is discussed and the more that this Policy Act is at risk, I think it's going to put potential pressure not only on Hong Kong and China, but in the region in general. And I think we need to put this in the broader context that it's the global industrial sector that's slowing down, and it's slowing down due to all the trade frictions that are increasing. And most of the trade frictions have been due to the negotiations between China and the United States, but this Hong Kong issue is now an exogenous event to those United States and Chinese talks. Although we're starting to get concerned that the Hong Kong democracy movement might get put into the overall trade agreement, slowing in Hong Kong is an independent risk to the Asian trade outlook and to the global industrial outlook outside of the trade negotiations, outside of just the specific United States-China trade negotiations.
What should investors watch for at this stage? If you're saying it's underappreciated here, what's the key here that investors need to watch for, and how should they react?
Well, I think that we need to see how these protests continue over this weekend and the coming weekends. We also need to make sure that there aren't any material disruptions in the Hong Kong port. I think that we've already seen the Q2 GDP number come out at minus 0.4%. So you're seeing the impact already on the local Hong Kong economy. The longer this goes on, I think that the worse that this situation potentially will get. And I think that that is basically what Fitch was pointing to as well in their downgrade.
You know, it's interesting. There are people who've looked at the situation with the trade talks between the United States and China and said it's no coincidence that those trade talks now are going to take place in October after the Federal Reserve has to make a decision on rate cuts here. Agree or disagree?
Well, I think that we need to view trade talks and the Fed in two different lanes, and that's the way I'm really viewing it. I think that the politicization of the Fed needs to stop. The Fed needs to support price stability and full employment growth. And given the jobs numbers today, I think a 25 basis point cut is likely. The trade negotiations, they're dealing with some major systemic issues, whether it's IP theft or fair entry of U.S. and international firms into Chinese markets. When we start trying to put the two together, and we had Bill Dudley come out with an op-ed, talking about the Fed maybe shouldn't give the U.S. administration leeway to negotiate trade. I think that's wrong. I think really we need to keep the Fed in its lane to support its dual mandate. And on the trade side, I think that these issues that have been growing over the course of the decade do need to be addressed. So given the fact that trade is weighing on the global industrial sector, policymakers are going to need to figure out new and creative ways, or more. They're going to need to step up with more stimulus. So we're expecting a Fed cut. We're expecting the ECB to do more in September, probably with a 10 to 20 basis point cut in the repo rate. We're expecting, well, we've already seen that the PBOC, the Chinese central bank, reduced their reserve ratio by 50 basis points. And the State Council meeting yesterday encouraged, or actually mandated, that local governments start pushing forward, more infrastructure and local projects. So we're starting to see the signs that policymakers are beginning to address this slowdown in other areas. But I think it's important to separate the two. And I don't like the idea of politicizing or trying to put political influence in central bank actions.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to your point, it's a great way of putting it, to getting creative here at central banks, and increasingly so. Bill, we'll get you back to talk about your portfolio more broadly, but thank you so much, because your op-ed was really great and worth reading. Bill Campbell there from DoubleLine, and you can read his take on the Hong Kong crisis and underappreciated risk on our website, CNN Business. It's a fascinating read.